And with this, I believe I have collected every piece of Creature from the Black Lagoon media. Stay tuned for my overly detailed ranking video, where I give you my opinion on each one of them. Maybe. Out of all the characters that Universal groups together as their Universal Monsters line, the Gill-Man is the one that gets the least amount of attention. The Gill-Man only ever got 3 movies to himself back in the 50s, and while I appreciate the Gill-Man trilogy, or Gillogy, for being one of few monster series with a definitive beginning and end, I can't help but feel cheated by the fact that in his near 70 years of existence, the Gill-Man has had only a handful of adaptations. There is a very strange novelization from 1977, a graphic novel adaptation from Dark Horse from 1992, a young adult novel from 2001, a very adult novel from 2006, and the biggest oddball of the bunch, Creature from the Black Lagoon, the musical. Seriously. And since I haven't seen people talk about all of these online before, I thought I would give my opinions on all of them. Treating the original trilogy as one entity, I want to go over each of these in chronological order and see how they compare to the original work. Starting with the 1970s novelization, and eventually this. Stay tuned! Boy, I love the Creature from the Black Lagoon. But wouldn't it be cooler if he was the size of Godzilla? In the 1970s, Universal created several novelizations of their semi-original ideas, including Creature from the Black Lagoon, by Carl Dreadstone. But not really. Carl Dreadstone was actually a pen name used by several different authors who contributed to this collection of novelizations, with Creature from the Black Lagoon being written by Walter Harris. I'm honestly surprised they included actual photos from the movie in this book, because the creature they describe is nothing like this. In this book, the creature is basically the size of the boat. And more than that, rather than being described as part fish, the creature's described as being more like a frog. And he has the body of a pig? It's also described as having, well, they need to know if he might reproduce. I'll leave it at that. Midway through the book, the creature also swats a helicopter out of the sky, and then eats several people who had been living near the river. Now, one of the themes in the original movie is humans crossing boundaries that they shouldn't in the pursuits of scientific research. Creature was really just defending himself when the humans came into his territory, and that is mostly present in this novelization, but I find it a lot harder to feel sympathy for the Gill-Man when he's acting this brutally. Oh, sorry, I keep saying Gill-Man, but in the book, he's not really Gill-Man, they call him AA for Advanced Amphibian. I'd make fun of how simplistic that name is, but Gill-Man wasn't too clever either. To the book's credit, when it comes to the creature capturing Kay at the end of the story, it does do a bit of a better job humanizing the creature than the movie did. When the creature takes Kay to its underwater cave, it attempts to feed her with the raw fish that it likes to eat. So when the American military flies in to blow the creature to smithereens with missiles, we're left with scattered, depressed pieces of the creature from the Black Lagoon, and one eye staring at Kay. And glaring reproachfully up at them, a blood-streaked, still sentient eye. Looking down at the eye, Kay screamed repeatedly, for the eye was accusing her, reproving her. The eye was the eye of a betrayed friend. You know what? That ending paragraph alone is pretty true to the original tale. While I still don't think the creature really acts in character with the original for most of the story, I do appreciate some of these creative liberties that the author has taken. I mean, really, what's the point of a retelling if you're just gonna do the exact same story? So, for right now, the novelization ranks just beneath the original trilogy. But that might change soon. Or not. So I guess the novel is pretty cool, but if only it were a little more graphic. So in the early 90s, Dark Horse Comics created several graphic novel adaptations of the original Universal Monster movies. And that's how we got Creature from the Black Lagoon, the comic. There's not actually much I can say about this one. It's a pretty straightforward comic adaptation of the original movie. And that's not to say it's bad. I really love this artwork. although I am somewhat partial to early 90s Dark Horse comics. There's just not much in this comic that wouldn't look much better when it's actually in motion on the screen. Except one thing. The creature in this version is much more emotive, and that really works in the book's favor, especially when it comes to the ending, where you see the creature grimacing in pain when he apparently dies. Aside from that, there's not much in this book that you can't already get in the original movie. Sure, it stays true to the morals of the original tale, because it practically is the original tale, just on paper. The comic isn't painfully boring or anything, it's just not quite as uniquely interesting as the novelization. And since it's just repeating things from the original movie, I can't give it much credit for its moral to the story either. So, for now, the graphic novel is the bottom of the list. But will it fare against the young adult novel? So maybe graphic wasn't so great. Let's go back to regular novel. Right off the bat, this one gets extra points for having the coolest title out of the whole bunch. Blackwater Horror? Why isn't that an actual movie title? Blackwater Horror is part of a young adult novel series published by Scholastic in the early 2000s. Based on the cover here, I thought the name of the series was Tales of Terror for the 21st Century, which is a mouthful. But according to the spine, the name of the series is just Universal Monsters, which is simpler to say, but much less catchy. While I haven't read the other books in this series, they give a pretty decent recap in this story. At the start of the series, a magic film projector accidentally releases 6 of the Universal Monsters into the real world, and it's up to the main characters to find and recapture all of them. And in this book, book number 5, the Gill-Man has made his new home in the bays of Florida, just like in his movies. Unlike his movies, however, the creature is described as having multiple rows of sharp teeth like a piranha, which I'm pretty sure he didn't have. The cover doesn't even show him with teeth, so I don't know what's going on here. Since this book is part of a larger series, that does make it a little harder to judge on its own. There are a lot of things in this story that probably make more sense if you're more familiar with how this universe works. And, well, I'm not. But this story intrigues me enough that I do want to read the other books in this series. As for how the story treats the Gill-Man, I love it. The major change that Blackwater Horror makes to the lore is that the creature has a mate now. And not just a woman that he kidnaps, an actual female gill person. There's no real explanation for where she comes from. There are a few red herrings, including the notion of were-gill people, but the idea that the characters seem to settle on by the end is that the Gill-Man wanted a woman to love so badly, he willed her into existence. I swear, it sounds a lot better when you read the book yourself. I also want to mention there's a couple scenes in this book that just repeat things from earlier, and not like they're just telling someone who wasn't there, they're literally coming to the same conclusion twice, and acting like it's the first time they've said it.
You kids need to be careful. There's a second creature out in those waters. He's beautiful. One of a kind.
But there's a second one.
You're lying!
Something I really love about this book is that the Gill-Man is not the villain. In fact, this is sort of a redemption arc for him. The antagonist starts to put him through a lot of torture, and the Gill-Man uses the power of love to free himself from all his problems. Again, this sounds a lot better if you read the book for yourself, I swear. So, Blackwater Horror goes above the graphic novel, but I think it's probably tied or maybe just a little higher than the novelization. Next, Old Gill upgrades from young adult horror to really adult sci-fi. Here we go. Times Black Lagoon. This is actually pretty important to Creature from the Black Lagoon lore. Released in 2006, this novel takes place in the far-off future of 2015, where a group of time travelers attempt to discover more about the origins of the creature. And reading this book well after 2015 kinda makes me chuckle at some of the dialogue.
You're gonna be going back in time, using this. Doc, are you telling me you made a time machine? Out of an iPod? A good thing Apple finally improved their battery life.
Bryce and Cody travel back to the Devonian Age and find out that the Gill-Man is the descendant of a sophisticated society of aliens. A very human-like society with their own rituals, literature, and even music. No, we'll get to you later. However, a zombie-like plague spreads throughout the society of aliens, causing them to transform into coarsened ones, which is the type of Gill-Man we see in the original films. And I will admit, I really like this idea. Sure, it's pretty weird to change the creature from the missing link of human evolution to a different species entirely. That would be like making King Kong a demon or Godzilla a space alien. No, wait, that one actually happened. But I think this adds on to the tragedy of his character. He's not just the last member of his species, he's a devolved member of his species. Through no fault of his own, he's been robbed of his intelligence, and now acts like a monster, which I think makes him seem a little more sympathetic. Until a group of creatures steals the time machine and stages an invasion on modern-day Earth. Yes, the tale of tragedy where the monster suffers more than any other character has become an alien invasion story. Just a little different than normal. Now, the change of genre I can tolerate, but the parts I really had to skip through were the gratuitous sex scenes.
Well, here we are prehistory. Now we have very important business to attend to. Do you want to be the first people to ever have sex? I want to lick the prehistoric salt off of every inch of your body. We're educated, but we're also really fucking gross. And we're gonna do this like 5 more times before we even find the creature.
The book itself is not bad. I do like it, but it doesn't really feel like a Gill-Man story. The Gill-Man society this book describes is very unique. So unique, in fact, that it wouldn't surprise me if this book was actually supposed to be an original story, and the author just changed a few details when he was hired to write a Black Lagoon book. It's definitely higher than the graphic novel for being more entertaining, but it's tied with the novelization for not really feeling like a Gill-Man book, pushing Blackwater horror up to number 1. Next, we go from a story rewriting origins to an original rewrite of a story. That transition was awful. I'm sorry.
In the Black Lagoon, the natives live in fear of the Black Lagoon, where people disappear in the Black Lagoon, where secret dangers.
That's right. Creature from the Black Lagoon, the musical. Let's just pop this in. Oh. This Blu-ray may not be real, but the show sure is. Where do I even start with this? There was no reason for this to be a musical, but I would be lying if I said these songs didn't get stuck in my head sometimes. You can slay me, crazy, drive me crazy. One thing that is driving me crazy is that there are 4 original songs in this musical, not counting reprises. Among those 4, there are 2 professional recordings that you can listen to on YouTube of all places. There's also an earlier version of one of the songs on Internet Archive, but that still leaves 2 of these songs that aren't available as professional recordings. And they have to be out there because they used clips of these songs in promotional ads for this show. And I really want to hear them.
Who will slay me?
Okay, but enough about that. How does this musical portray the creature? Let's start with his design. Well, surprisingly, it's pretty good. A nice modernized take that doesn't stray too far from the original. I especially love the little fins on his back that fold out like wings. He also has a shark fin on his head that looks like a mohawk, which I think is pretty cool. Really, I wouldn't mind a Gill-Man movie where they use this design. Now, what about his personality and how it plays into the moral of this story? In the original movie, the creature was just a simple animal that wanted to live his life peacefully and acted out when he was threatened. And in this musical, I don't know. When the Gill-Man first comes on stage for this show, he sings a song called Prime Evil, where he proudly boasts about being evil. In the words of another musical character based on a movie, "Such a bold departure from the original source material." And then we get to the part where he kidnaps Kay, which is where things get really confusing. In earlier performances of this show, the creature could only properly communicate through song, and otherwise struggled to form sentences. In this version, it seems to be implied that Kay is projecting onto Gill what she wants to see. So when she falls in love with him, yes, she falls in love with him in this version, she's actually falling in love with an idea that she's made up in her own head, which I think is what's being foreshadowed in the opening number of the show.
Remember what I say, my words are true. So all of you, beware the dreams you brew.
And if that is what they were going for, I think that's kinda clever. In this version, Kay spends the whole show wishing she had more than what she has. So the moral of the story would be to not let your dreams blind you from reality, lest they guide you toward destruction. Or something like that. Because when Kay attempts to get the creature's attention in the end, he eats her. And it's portrayed as being Kay's fault for being so desperate for romance that she seeks it with an animal. I also want to say there is a surprising amount of foreshadowing for this ending. Like way more than I would expect from a theme park attraction. Then there are later performances of the show where the creature's portrayed as being fully cognitive, having an Australian accent, and very much being in love with her. Pardon my French, but c'est quoi ce bordel? If he was really in love with her, was eating her an accident? What's the moral in that case? It doesn't quite seem the same as the first one.
I am deeply in love with you. You just killed like 6 people right in front of me.
Oh, sorry, mate. Is that a problem?
Oh no, that actually kind of turned me on.
And yes, I know it's just a dumb theme park attraction that hardly lasted 2 months, but I just don't know how to feel about it. Part of me just really likes some of the catchy songs that I actually tried to learn on guitar. Then another part is just too confused about the creature to even form a proper thought. It doesn't even feel right to rank this with the other Black Lagoon spin-off media because it's just so different from everything else. It's just such an oddity. It's inconsistent in whether or not it wants to be true to the original creature from the Black Lagoon. It outright deviates from the source material for comedic effect, and then in that second version, it backpedals in a way that becomes even more of a deviation. And all the characters are so horny. But that's beside the point. Okay, to recap, Blackwater Horror is probably the one that stays the truest to the original source material, with a moral to the story that falls right alongside the moral to the original movies. Time's Black Lagoon is an interesting legacy sequel that builds onto the lore of the character, but falls a little short with its third act conflict. The novelization is a decent reimagining of the original story, but tries a little too late to match the original themes. The graphic novel is a beat-for-beat retelling of the original movie with a more emotive creature. And the musical is the musical. But hey, it's a fun watch if you got 30 minutes to kill. Bill, Ted, what did you do? My stage is on fire!
Whoa.
I was gone for 1 day! What happened here?
Sorry, dude. It was Halloween, and our audience got a little crazy.
Do you know how long I've had this show running? For 2 months! And you burned it all down in 1 night!
Bogus.
Do you know how hard it is for a fish to learn how to sing?